D&D combat is bad. Plenty of dungeon masters have been saying this for ages. Yet, you remember that you kinda had fun playing it. So what do they mean when they say that D&D combat is bad? Hello everyone, CJ here, game master, designer, and veteran tabletop instructor. In this video, I will explain what is mechanically wrong with D&D's combat. But first of all, you need to know that I am not telling you to stop playing D&D. You can still have fun playing any game you want. But dissecting the mechanical flaw of this game can only help you improve your DMing and game design skills. I am just telling you what to look out for so that you know how to tweak your game into giving you a more satisfying experience. After watching this video, I bet you would have new appreciation for your DMs who had to use all the tricks in and out of the book to wrangle the system into giving you a good time. We will be going back in history to look at the inspirations for D&D and its evolution through time. But before that, let's look at the problems with the current version, 5e. I know that we have the 2024 5e, but the problem remains the same. Combat in 5e is generally balanced between PCs and enemies standing in front of each other, trading blows. If you are fighting against enemies with low hit points, the swinginess of the dice roll can provide a few surprises. But once you are fighting a monster with high HP that require more than a couple of hits to take down, it turns into a slog. This is due to the law of large numbers. The more hit points a monster has, the more your attack rolls will converge towards the average. For example, if each swing of your attack deals an average of 3.5 damage, there is 50% chance that you will take down an enemy with 35 hit points in 10 swings. With increasingly less variation, the more hit points the monster has. If we use the emotional trajectory graph to plot out this combat experience, it creates a flatlined experience after the initial uncertainty phase when the players had to figure out the monster's abilities. This graph is a tool commonly used to track the shape of stories, but it can also be used in game design. But actually, different classes have special features like action surge, divine smite, or even spells, you say? That should make the game more fun, isn't it? Ironically, it actually makes it slightly worse in certain aspects. In general, flashy combat features are great. But in the case of D&D, where they have access to all their abilities immediately at the start of combat, it is always strategically optimal to use them early. Due to the action economy, it is always better to use them to wipe out weaker enemies first. Unless, of course, they are one-hit kill trash mobs. Even when you are fighting just a single powerful boss, it is also a good idea to nuke it with your most powerful abilities first. Because if you save it for too long, you might end up killing the boss without even using most of your cool features. So the graph for this combat experience may start off relatively high, but it will dip down as combat progresses, because all the cool features are exhausted at the early rounds, and you are left with normal attacks and weak spells towards the end. Had D&D combat always been so boring? So what tricks did Dungeon Masters use to make their games fun? To answer this, we have to go back in time and look at the genesis of D&D. D&D was co-created by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. The two of them were part of the general wargaming community, but their designs came from different philosophical lineages. Some would argue that it was through Dave Arneson's experience playing in David Wesley's Brownstein games that the seeds of role-playing game was first conceived. Brownstein was a free-form, open-ended game, inspired by older wargames such as Strategos and its predecessor Spielkrieg. But the main Brownstein game takes place before the actual war happens. Players assume the role of spies, barons, revolutionaries, or others and set out to achieve their respective objectives. They can even negotiate with each other because their objectives are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So unlike Werewolf or recent social deduction games, Braunstein is a non-zero-sum game, which was very sophisticated for its time. Unfortunately, there are no official rules for the game, and the referee in charge of running it, David Wesley, practically made up all the rules on the spot. Dave Arneson eventually started his own Braunstein-inspired game, set in a fantasy setting called Blackmoor. He used the various rules he made up, and also used the combat rules from other games to supplement it. One of the rule sets he used came from the fantasy supplement of Chainmail, a medieval war game created by Jeff Perrin and Gary Gygax. To make long story short, Dave ended up meeting Gary Gygax, demonstrated his Blackmoor game, and the rest is history. Supporters of Dave Arneson would say that there would be no role-playing game without Dave. But Gary's supporter would argue that if Gary didn't commit the rules to paper, then role-playing games would only be played by Dave and his small group of friends. There is a whole debate about this issue, and I'm not going to go into this now. Anyway, the original D&D was quite mechanically wonky. It had the flatline problem too, but compounding it is the fact that all attacks deal an equal amount of damage, 1d6. Also, monsters' hit points were calculated by rolling their hit dice, so even the same type of monsters may have different amount of hit points. Effectively, it makes all monsters feel like a black box, and you don't know if you have dealt a significant amount of damage after hitting it so many times. It feels like they just die kinda randomly. What makes the early D&D games bearable were actually the DMs. They created rules on the spot, Braunstein style, to facilitate the players coming up with creative solutions not written in the rulebook, or even use DM fiat to kill the monsters early. This sort of flexibility is what some OSR folks are trying to reproduce. But this is really just a band-aid to the game mechanics problem. Even if great DMs can come up with narratively satisfying results using their fiat, it won't satisfy the more analytical players, because there is a mismatch between the narrative and mechanics, creating a ludonarrative dissonance. Have I really reduced the Manticore's hit points to 0? Or did the DM just rule that it died because he was bored? Eventually, D&D would evolve into Advanced D&D, 2nd edition, and then 3rd. 3rd edition is pretty close to the 5th, just slightly crunchier. So we have returned to the flatline and dip down problems previously mentioned. Here is the thing. There has been a long-running debate whether D&D combat should be more wargame-like or more cinematic. But in general, I would argue that most D&D players want to experience epic cinematic battles with rising tension punctuated by powerful climaxes. To do this, DMs usually use the 3-act story structure, or even use the Japanese 4-part story structure, Ki Sho Ten Ketsu, which is often used in manga, anime, and even in Japanese video games. Ki Sho Ten Ketsu may look similar to the 3-act story structure, but there is an emphasis on the twist, 10, at where the climax would be in the 3-act story structure. The twist can be the enemy overcoming the heroes, or it could even be the heroes' attack working exceedingly well, or it can be whatever surprises that make the conflict memorable. Personally, I prefer this style. To create the cinematic experience, there are a few common tricks that DMs use: space and time manipulation. Space manipulation means positioning the enemies strategically. By putting the minions not worth using your special features on in front and the boss at the back, the players are forced to conserve their special features until they get to the boss. This is really just a delay tactic. It is not perfect, it extends encounter time, but it is often good enough. Time manipulation means providing multiple encounters to the players. they don't know which combat is going to be more important, so they are going to conserve their specials until they meet the boss. However, this may cause some players to become overly conservative and end up not using their specials at all. In general, D&D's player options are just not well suited for creating the cinematic experience. And some designers know this. That's why they have created their own systems to address this issue. Among the first to do so was perhaps 13th Age, created by Rob Heinsohn and Jonathan Tweet, the former lead designers of D&D 4th edition and 3rd edition respectively. They introduced the escalation die to the 13th Age combat system. This die provides an escalating bonus to the PC and enemies' attacks. As combat progresses, all combatants become more accurate and as a result, more deadly. This system simulates the rising tension of combat pretty well. When I was designing Cloudbreaker Alliance, I wanted to add more oomph to it. So I created a token system called Spirit Tokens. It addresses the same problems, but it requires the players to actively spend their tokens to unleash their specials, like fighting games' supers. So the climax and twists are more intentional and impactful. Boss enemies can also unleash specials by using the danger tokens they accumulate. So it is a two-pronged design. Both the PC and enemies' emotional trajectories rise and clashes at the climax. Would you use your offensive special now and risk getting hit by the enemy's devastating special attack later? Or would you play it safe by saving your spirit tokens for a defensive special? Game design is all about creating interesting choices. Sure, you can borrow CBA's system and transplant it to D&D, but you don't really have to. It can be done the lazy way by just using one prong. Just redesign the encounter instead of revamping all of D&D's player options. Instead of having a Dragon's Breath attack be available at the start and recharge at a roll of 5 or 6, you can change it into a cumulative point-based system. The dragon can use its breath attack once it had sucked in enough air to blow a big one. And as it accumulates air, its sacs became more vulnerable to the PC's piercing and slashing attacks. Or perhaps you can have the battlefield change through combat. In the middle of an encounter, a volcano might just erupt and spew lava randomly across the battlefield. The longer the encounter drags on, the more violent and unpredictable the eruption gets. If the players are clever enough, they can even push their enemies into the crater. Either way, the most important thing to focus on is to increase the stake as combat progresses, preferably for both sides. Alternatively, you can try to increase the emotional and narrative stakes instead. The more you hurt your enemy, the more likely you will break the antidotes you need to save the princess. But this is quite a complicated technique that we have to leave for another time. Interestingly, D&D 4E, which had Rob Heinsohn as one of its lead designers, was on the cusp of creating a truly interesting experience when it introduced the bloodied condition. Players and monsters become bloodied when they are reduced to 50% of their maximum hit points. Some monsters gain special abilities when they are bloodied, and some class features work better on bloodied enemies. Unfortunately, they completely erased this system in 5E, so we are back to square one. The Mythic Odyssey of Theros Splatbook may have attempted to address the same issue when it introduced mythic monsters and gave them a second phase, like video game bosses. This happens when their hit points are reduced to 0. Then they automatically recover their hit points and gain a new action or two. Everything else stays mostly the same. Honestly, I just don't think that the second form feels significantly different enough. So I think it is another missed opportunity because they didn't go far enough with this experiment. So without a good combat mechanic that support a cinematic combat experience, the responsibility of creating a satisfying combat experience is all passed onto your DM. I know that some of you might be thinking that D&D is not supposed to be a cinematic experience. It's a war game. But I would argue that it is flawed as a war game too, because it is missing a very important rule for something that is very common in real wars but often overlooked: a retreat rule. Without the option to retreat, players who are ambushed by monsters that severely outclass them are just prolonging their eventual defeat. There is no strategic consideration there. There are also no rules for how long PCs should dungeon delve before they are allowed to turn back and rest. D&D is missing a lot of things to be considered a decent war game, because it tries to be both and doesn't have enough guts to commit to one side. Anyway, that's the flaw of D&D combat, unfixed for 50 years. Honestly, I don't even know if they are ever going to fix it. It would just be too much work to do at this point. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. I will be doing more TTRPG design talks like this one, and I also do TTRPG news when I find something interesting to share. CJ, over and out.